Hello, my name is Ian McCall, and this is another in the series of consultations in dermatology. Today we're going to look at a sensitizing touch, contact dermatitis. Now, contact dermatitis can be both irritant and allergic. Let me try and explain what that means. All of us can develop a dermatitis in our hands if we're exposed to irritants for long enough. You know, if you use tufts in your hand, or if you're doing a lot of unaccustomed washing up, or if you're handling cement and you're outside and your hands are drying and getting wet and dried all the time, then after a period of time you'll develop an irritant dermatitis. And in an irritant dermatitis, the skin goes dry and it cracks. What happens though in an allergic contact dermatitis? Well, here the skin doesn't just go dry and cracking, it gets acutely edematous and it weeps, because this is an acute allergic reaction. And the difference is here, you just need a tiny exposure to whatever it is you're allergic to for your skin to flare in this particular way. Now, the mechanisms by which these occur are as follows. First of all, irritants can cross the skin if that stratum corneum, the thin little layer on the surface of the skin, if that's broken or if it's not forming normally. And remember, atopic patients have a defective barrier function, so they're more susceptible to irritant hand dermatitis. You know, if you have atopic eczema, if you're an atopic individual, if you've got asthma, hay fever, and a tendency to eczema, then if you become a hairdresser or a nurse and you're washing your hands all the time, then the barrier function, exposure to soaps, detergents, what have you, with the broken down barrier function, you'll get an irritant hand dermatitis before someone else will, and your hands will dry and they'll crack. And of course, one of the problems of that is that the barrier function's further damaged. The cracks go all the way through the epidermis into the dermis, and hence allergens that you might be exposed to are much more easily penetrating into the skin and elicit a response. Here we have someone whose earlobes are acutely inflamed, edematous, and weeping. And this is because they're allergic to the nickel in their earrings. And this is perhaps the commonest allergy that we see in practice. And the problem is that nickel is found in a variety of other products. It's in stainless steel. Stainless steel has about 10% nickel in it. It's in other jewelry elsewhere, chains, watch straps, things like that. And so the individual can react there. You can also react in gene studs, and we'll see some evidence or some examples of this as we go on. So remember, there's contact irritant and there's contact allergic dermatitis. Let's go to some of these images and look at them in a bit more detail. This is just an overview. You can see here the oozing, and you can see the vesiculation. Look at the fluid here and the little vesicles. This will be itchy as blazes because there's an allergic reaction in the epidermis, and the unmyelinated nerve endings there are getting stimulated, and they're going to cause itch. Here's another example of a nickel dermatitis, but here it's nickel in the metal fastener of the bra, and when you sweat, it leaches nickel out of the metal here into the skin, and if you're allergic to it, you'll come up like this. Now, you may have been made allergic by your earrings, and so you don't wear those. You perhaps wear gold earrings. I mean, the commonest way of getting a nickel allergy is having your ears pierced and having a metal stud in there. And thereafter, you can start reacting to the metal here. You can start reacting to nickel that might be in a belt. Here's the metal of the belt, and here is a low-grade dermatitis where the metal is coming in contact with the skin. And in point of fact, if you then went on and tested that patient with some nickel under occlusion for 48 hours and then removed it, this is what the skin looks like. Because when you're allergic in one part of the skin, you're allergic all over the skin. It doesn't matter where the allergen's applied. And this is the type of testing that we in fact do when we're doing testing for allergic contact dermatitis. We do patch testing. These little indentations are made by an aluminium disc, and behind that disc are the various allergens, usually in ointment base, and they're placed against the skin for 48 hours. It takes that length of time for the allergen to be incorporated and absorbed across the skin and to elicit an immune reaction. How does it do that? Well, what happens is when an allergen gets into the skin, allergens usually are going to be proteins. They're taken up by cells called Langerhans cells, which are in the epidermis, and they break down these proteins into peptides. And then the Langerhans cell puts the peptides in association, which are called with proteins called major histocompatibility antigens, on the surface, on the outside of the Langerhans cell. And the Langerhans cell goes via the lymphatics all the way to the local lymph glands. And it's there that you have the store of immune cells that haven't yet been made competent. In other words, the Langerhans cells brings in an antigen to these, what you might call lymphoid stem cells, and they then become sensitized to that allergen. They're ready to react to that allergen. And there's substances called interleukin-1 released by the Langerhans cells that bring in a whole lot of lymphocytes from the lymph node. And these sensitized lymphocytes then produce interleukin-2, which produces many, many more of these sensitized lymphocytes. So what happens is these lymphocytes then circulate back to the skin, and so the next time you get exposed to an allergen on the surface of the skin, you've got all these lymphocytes sitting there just waiting for this allergen to come in, and bang, they react with it in the epidermis itself, releasing substances called cytokines that cause all the inflammation and the dilatation of the blood vessels and all the redness. And that's when you get this acute reaction with edema between the cells in the epidermis. And if this edema breaks out from between the cells onto the surface, it weeps and forms these vesicles. So this is called a type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. As against, say, a type 1 that's due to histamine released from mast cells. And there, if you get exposed to an allergen, bang, you react by forming hive-like lesions in the skin. Here, if you get exposed to an allergen, you don't get hive-like lesions, you get vesiculation and fluid forming, and it takes a wee bit longer for the reaction to occur. So this is patch testing. We put the allergens on, leave them for 48 hours, bring the patient back, strip them off, and we see which ones have reacted. And these particular ones have reacted. This is part of the European standard battery of allergens, which contains a whole variety of things that people are commonly in contact to that they develop allergic reactions to. And that's things like nickel and cobalt in metals, paraphenylene diamine, which is the black dye that women use when they dye their hairs, various rubber molecules, various preservatives that are in creams, that may be in cosmetics that people apply, and glues like colophony that's in Elastoplast, or epoxy resins that people use. Basically, the European standard battery will cover about 75 to 80% of the common allergens that people may be exposed to. There are some rare ones that people may be exposed to in certain occupations, specialized occupations that you need to test for separately. So, patch testing, the patch tests are taken off at 48 hours and read, and then they're left open like this for another 48 hours, because some things are tested near irritant level. And you may get a bit of a reaction at 48 hours, and then it'll disappear at 96 hours. And that means that it was just acting as a mild irritant, not as an allergen. If it's an allergen, then it will actually get worse between 48 and 96 hours and become more prominent. So that's why the allergens are taken off between 48 and 96 hours. Here's an example of someone with a footwear dermatitis. See how it's mainly in the upper part of the foot here? There's a sort of line along here. And these were the shoes that the person was allergic to, was commonly wearing, and that caused the problem. And when this patient was tested, they came up to some of the rubber molecules, thiuram. They actually were allergic to perfume mix and balsam of Peru. Colophony is another product. This patient also reacted, though, to parts of the shoe. Shoes are complicated. They can be made of leather. This one wasn't. It was made of canvas. But the layers inside are held together by glues, and they're often rubber glues. And it's usually the rubber or rubber glues that the person may react to. Here's another example. Often it's the top of the feet, the dorsal surface here, that reacts rather than the sole of the foot. And that's because the skin's much thinner here, and allergens within footwear can penetrate when the feet get sweaty. They dissolve the allergens either out of the leather or out of the glue in between the layers that make up the shoe. Usually it's old shoes because things have to wear down a bit before the glue that keeps the layers together sort of leaches through. So this patient, in point of fact, was allergic to potassium dichromate, which is the allergen that's, it's a substance that's used to chrome the leathers, to prepare leather. But if it's not prepared properly, then the chrome can leach out, and this is a reaction that you can in fact get. Here's another one, where here was the dermatitis just on the tops of the toes, nothing between the toes because they're not in contact, but here was the dermatitis here. And this patient was in fact allergic to a glue that was used to put the layers together, not the potassium dichromate. Here's another type of dermatitis. The palms of the hands are really very thick. It's difficult to get an allergen to cross over there and get, a florid reaction. But this was a rubber allergy. So, there isn't any vesiculation here, but there's a reaction in the skin, almost a hyperkeratotic eczema. And this patient was patch tested and found to be allergic to rubber. And it was bicycle handles that they were handling that were rubber that was causing this reaction. You can sometimes get the same thing in golfers on one hand when it's the rubber of their grips that they may be reacting to. So any chronic hand dermatitis should have patch testing done. This patient, though, is a much more acute reaction. Look at the vesiculation here, and where the skin's peeled away. And this was a thiram allergy, this was a latex rubber allergy. That's different. This patient reacted to latex rubber gloves. And this can be a major problem if you're a nurse and even if you're a hairdresser and the like, and you're using these sorts of gloves to protect your hands. This was another form of hand dermatitis, but these were the hands of a painter. And again, notice the back of the hand rather than the thick skin and the palms where the allergen can't penetrate as easily. It's much more easy for it to penetrate in the thinner skin in the back of the hands. And this was to a biocide that's in paints. Paints have to have some form of antibacterial, antifungal agent in them, or else fungus will grow when on the paint when you paint a wall. So he was unfortunately reacting to the biocides in the paint. This was a lady who was dyeing her hair, and unfortunately she developed the analogy to paraphenylenediamine, which is the pigment that's in hair dye. Often, there's a bit of weeping in the scalp there, but often it's the thinner skin round about in the neck, when the dye is being washed off, that causes the problems. And this is past the acute stage here, and you can see where the skin's eroded in parts where the vesicles and the blisters have burst. He was a man that was allergic to neomycin. It's a topical antibiotic that was in an ointment he had been putting on his face, and you can see the marked exudation and drying and crusting that's come up. So what I'm getting at is there are a variety of things that you can develop a contact allergic reaction to. This was him once he cleared up. Remember, this is all just in the epidermis, the top layers of the skin, so it's not going to cause scarring. It's only if a process goes right down to the dermis and beyond that you're going to get scarring in the skin. So it all heals up after you treat it with some topical cortisone cream and topical antibiotics there. Certainly not neomycin. This is a very characteristic type of contact dermatitis. This is a plant contact dermatitis. Whenever you see streakiness like this, it means someone's brushed past a plant and part of the sap or the allergen's been deposited in a sort of linear way on the skin, and within 24 to 48 hours it comes up in acute allergic contact dermatitis. This one was to Robin Gordon grevillea, but in the States it's commonly due to the roost tree, but the whole variety of plants can potentially cause a streaky contact dermatitis like this. This was another plant contact dermatitis. But look at this one. It's an acute bullous eruption. Look at the marked big blisters that are forming here. Some have burst and crusted and they're secondarily infected. Now, you can see from this that there's a contact dermatitis takes a variety of forms. The plant contact dermatitis is certainly very acute like this, but latex allergy can be very acute, and so can the reaction obviously to some of these topical antibiotics. And even nickel allergy can give you a good going reaction if you're very sensitive to it. And you might not have worn your earrings for 2 to 3 years. Your body remembers. You put them back in again, and it'll react within 24 to 48 hours, sometimes even a shorter period than that if you're highly allergic. Some people, even if they're highly allergic to nickel and there's a little bit of nickel in the food that they eat, perhaps in spinach or some other vegetable that's grown in soil that has a high nickel content, they can get enough nickel coming in the food, and especially if the food's been, say, boiled in a stainless steel pan, then even some nickel come out of that, they ingest it, and that's enough to in fact trigger an allergic reaction in the skin, because the allergen's getting there via the bloodstream, and instead of coming in from the outside, it's coming from the inside and causing the reaction in their skin. But you need to be really, really allergic, highly sensitive to nickel for that to occur. There's a variety of other ways that you can get contact dermatitis. Some things will only react not if you put them on the skin, but if you put them on the skin and get exposed to sunlight. In other words, they are photocontact things. It needs light to somehow change the product on the surface of the skin to make it allergic. And this was a man who had a photocontact reaction to a cream that he was applying to his neck. He wasn't applying, well, he was applying it behind there, but light didn't get in there, and so it didn't react in the area that was spared behind his ears. This is another patch test that was done on a lady, and here all of these things that you're seeing are in fact preservatives. She had quite a lot of preservative allergy. Formaldehyde, quaternium-15, that's a formaldehyde releaser. Formaldehyde is a very cheap preservative that's seen in a variety of creams. Parabens is another preservative that's that commonly people develop allergic reactions to. And this lady was also reacting to Cathon. So she was going to have problems, because these are the major preservatives that are used in creams. So any cream product would give her problems if it had any of these preservatives in them. Ointments don't have preservatives in them. They don't need them. So people can tolerate ointments, but not creams when they have this type of contact allergy. Here was another photocontact allergy, mainly in extensor surfaces of the hands where the sun can get at it, but not so much in the inside surface. And this isn't an allergic reaction, it's actually a photoirritant. And this is where lime juice lands on the surface of the skin, and it reacts. It won't do anything on its own, but it will react with sunlight to give a phototoxic reaction. So this isn't an allergic, this is a phototoxic reaction. And it gives rise to this pigmentation, streaky type pigmentation in the skin. There's a variety of other plants that produce furocoumarins, which are photosensitizing chemicals that can do this in the same way. Meadowgrass can, celery can, parsley can as well. And lastly, we're just going to go back to the irritant contact dermatitis again. Remember I said that if anyone's exposed to enough soap, detergents, or what have you, long enough, then they'll break their barrier function, the skin will dry out, and the skin will crack like this. And unfortunately, most people who have an allergic contact dermatitis, because the allergic contact dermatitis whips the top layer of the epidermis off and they lose their barrier function, they're very susceptible to having irritant contact reactions as well. So it's often a mixture of things that someone gets when they have an allergic contact dermatitis, especially if the hands. They've got to protect their hands from a variety of other irritants and keep them away from soap, detergents and the like. Keep protecting them, keep moisturizing till the normal barrier function comes back on the surface of the skin. So it's not just the allergen that's important, it's the other incidental irritants that their hands and bodies are exposed to in day-to-day work. So we could go on talking about contact dermatitis for a long time, I suspect. But we've only got a bit of time here today to go through this. I hope I've given you a flavor of contact irritant and contact allergic dermatitis, the importance of patch testing and determining what the allergen is. I hope I've maybe let some women realize that having pierced ears is just a recipe for future problems. It'll mean you'll need 22 karat gold after that once you become allergic to nickel. So take care with all these piercings. Take care with if you're young and you're thinking of putting bolts in your ears and bolts in your lip and what have you. If you develop a contact allergy to the metal in these, it's going to be with you lifelong. You do not grow out of this. If you're allergic to nickel and we test you 30 years later, bang, you react to nickel. Your immune system remembers. We have a very, very, very efficient immune system in that regard. And the treatment of acute contact dermatitis, it really is good, strong topical steroids to suppress that inflammation as quickly as possible. Obviously, withdraw the allergen. Don't get exposed to it. Treat any secondary infection. If there's been oozing, there's usually secondary staph infection there. And in severe cases of plant contact dermatitis that I showed you with that streakiness in the skin, then often you need some oral steroids for 4 to 5 days to suppress that process quickly and give you some relief. The great thing is it doesn't scar, but gee, it can sure itch and make you feel uncomfortable. Thank you very much.